mapping conflicts is very important. And we rarely do that. It is very important to map out conflict situations like we map out in geography. Mapping a conflict is to understand a conflict. And mapping conflict means looking at who are the actors in a conflict situation. And this is critical. Who are actors in a conflict situation? Often, in the practice, we do not identify all the actors. We identify the articulate actors. In Somalia, the disaster in Somalia was because the United Nations only identified the actors who had guns, the military formations. They did not identify and recognize the inarticulate actors, the village elders, the civil society actors, and all the other elements in civil society. And it was a disaster which must have cost at least $6 billion or more. And always we know that in the intervention phase, particularly in the United Nations, often they are unable to identify all the actors in a conflict process. And actors means not only actors with interest base, but to look at, in the mapping, many other entities, business, media, those who act on the conflict and who have impinged on the conflict. So every mapping out must have both the local, the national, the regional, and the international. And it is through that mapping that we get an overview so that we can understand the entry point in the conflict. How and where can we intervene? And often, when we are identifying a particular conflict, we do not recognize that there are multiple conflicts. In most societies, whether it is in Sri Lanka or Colombia, there are multiple conflicts going on at the same time. In trying to concentrate on one conflict, we may forget the other conflicts which are emerging. And in protracted social conflicts, what happens often is that the identity of the conflict itself changes. And how does it change? We can therefore talk about 5 particular types of conflict. We have resource-based, ideological conflict. Ideological conflicts are basically the clash of missions about the haves and the have-nots. The great ideological debate between capitalism and communism was, in fact, a major ideological conflict about the interpretation of the world, about justice, about everything. But today, such ideological conflicts have lost its center. With the collapse of communism, with the collapse of after the Cold War, ideological conflicts do not have a global character. It does not mean that the have-nots do not have problems and are not concerned about social justice. But there is no one single headquarters in Peking or Moscow to direct and give guidance to that particular conflict. And therefore it takes a different form, the ideological formation. The second element which we talk of is resource-based conflicts, conflicts over resources. And it is our prediction that these conflicts are going to become more and more in the future. Resource-based conflicts are over water because the supply of water in the universe is getting more and more limited. And Nile, for example, the battles over the Nile, perhaps in the year 2020, may even be more overwhelming than the ethnic conflicts we are talking about today. There are battles over the Ganges River, or the rivers which are flowing in Turkey, in the Middle East, because of the limitations of that finite resource, water. Battles over oil are already on that agenda. The great battle in Kuwait was the battle over who controls oil in the Middle East. And eventually we will see, as the century goes on to the 21st century, even the battle for clean air, because of the enormous ecological degradation that we are now witnessing, new types of conflicts based on resources. The third element then is governance and authority conflicts. That is, conflicts which are based on who should govern us. In China, there is a debate implicit that men over 87, which in fact constitutes 90% of the Politburo, should not permanently govern the Chinese population. The legitimacy of governance is one of the biggest central debates that we are seeing today in Africa, in the Caucasus, in Russia. Who governs and who gives you the right to govern, and the whole concept of democracy is involved in that particular type of conflict. And finally is identity conflicts. And identity conflicts are both existential, as I reflected earlier. Who am I?